I will never, ever want to not be ready to empower any person to become the man, the woman, the person that you have called them to be.
The Bible says the harvest is plenty, the laborers are few. How dare we tell half the church, we don't got no plan for you, even though we need you. Today we're going to dive into an important and often misunderstood conversation in our culture, the role of women in society. From Genesis to today's headlines, there are a million different ideas about the dignity, purpose, and partnership of women. Today we'll talk about relationships, leadership, and what it looks like for men and women to thrive side by side on mission. As urban missionaries and as leaders, it matters what you believe about the women in your community. This is going to be a conversation.
Yes, it is.
I'm ready?
Excited.
I get nervous about these kinds of conversations.
I can tell. I can tell. You're a little, just kind of like, what makes you get nervous?
I'm a woman.
Okay.
And actually, no, it's that I'm a woman who has spent time in spaces that I have literally had to say to myself, man, Lord, why'd you make me a woman? And so, and from Genesis to the headlines, people have a lot of thoughts. People have a lot of thoughts. So let me ask you this. When you hear the role of a woman, I know a lot of people are functioning from either empowerment all the way to exhaustion. They're tired of the conversation, right? So when you hear that phrase, given today's cultural context, what do you think people are really wrestling with?
Oh, what do I think people are wrestling with? I think people are wrestling with the same thing everyone else is wrestling with. Like, what does my camp believe about women and men and all that? And how can I fit in so I cannot be isolated and lonely? I think that's a big part of the thing. It's just like, I just need to kind of don't stand out. Don't rock the boat. And I think that is. And so therefore, what that has produced, it has produced the extremes. And I think that's oftentimes that the people in the middle, often, don't want to be called out they want to be called out in any way. So they end up finding out what are the things that is going to make me safe in the camp that I've done. So I think that that's the big part of the issue. At the core of what I think it comes down to three things that I heard you would talk about in the very beginning, this concept of dignity, purpose, and partnership. I think those are things that are oftentimes we are wrestling with, and sharing that and giving that what has been given to us by God. Like, these are not something that I got to give to you. Right. Like, no, it's your divine right. It was the divine intent that we had, and you can recognize that divine intent was something that we see pre-fall. Right. Yeah. So you're the preacher here in the room. Give me Genesis 1 and 2. Tell me your thoughts about what you see God is saying about women from there. Yeah. And can I basically utilize what you began with talking about this idea of dignity, purpose, and partnership? Because I think when we talk about that, we have to think about it in the context of divine intent. Pre-fall, those things weren't battling. They weren't in odds. There weren't power dynamics in that, and so when we think about it in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, first you see there was equal dignity. It says they were created in the image of God. It wasn't say man was created in the image of God and then it was that they were created in the image of God. And I think that this idea of dignity, I think is really important. And that dignity was a shared dignity, equal dignity. There wasn't this kind of which one is more important, but there was a shared dignity that we had that I think is important, that we both were created in the image of God. And so I think that's one. Number two is this idea of shared purpose. It says male and female, he created them, where they were co-rulers, co-stewards of the word of the earth and what God was given. Yeah, it wasn't like, all right, male, female, like there was just like all the things. So God's divine intent, right, that they were of equal value, they were there was a shared purpose in what they have. And then ultimately that leads to mutual partnership. And I think that mutual partnership is also an important dynamic of this. And that in anything, and in any partnership, is like you bring stuff to the table, I bring stuff to the table. We come to the table together because I am insufficient by myself, right? It's not good for man to be isolated. It's not good for man to be alone, right? And so in the same way that there's a tension that we face is that we are created in need for communion and community with one another. And I think that that mutual partnership, I think, is critical for us as we, as we think about it. And again, this is before Genesis 3. So these are the divine intent that God has given us early in the scriptures before the fall, right?
So what it sounds like you're saying, which you are saying, but to say it explicitly, is that when God said it wasn't good for man to be alone, he wasn't just talking about marriage. He was talking about the mission.
Yes, 100%.
I love it.
I mean, that's really what's going on. We're talking about the mission. And I think that it's not good for man to be alone. Can talk about all types of relationships, our relationships, man to man, man to female, man to, just like it's not good for man to be isolated, to be alone, to be trying to get away from their heart, get away from who they are, who they've been made to be. And when I think about, and I think overarching, even though we were talking specifically about Adam, I think that verse can be applied to anyone. It's not good for the humanity, humans to be isolated, humans to be alone, but we were created for community. We were created for relationship with God and relationship with one another. And I think that that's critical for us to establish that as a baseline for us. So it wasn't that women were created for men, right? That's not what's going on there, right? But we were created to fulfill a deep need that both of us have as humans. The need for relationship.
I want to be clear. The Bible does say that, but we were created for each other. So women were created for men, and men were created for women. So yes,
vice versa. And that's I wasn't saying explicitly.
Yeah, no, but I was my comment. I was putting up my comment. Yes.
Yep.
Well, I worked at a place once where I misspoke and called something a women's empowerment event, and that set off a ripple effect. Like, we don't do women's empowerment. And I didn't mean that. I actually was not even intending to say empowerment. It was something else. But when you hear the phrase empowerment, it obviously gets linked with autonomy and a lack of throwing off submission and all other stuff. But when the Bible talks about partnership and mutual submission, there is this empowerment element to that. How do we reconcile this idea that empowerment may have some parts of autonomy, but we operate in partnership and mutual submission?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say empowerment is a good thing. I think we need to be empowered. So I think there's a problem with people having a problem with talking about empowerment. I think words can be co-opted, and then you can create something, and then now all of a sudden, you can't say certain things. And so I do think that empowerment is a good word, and we are encouraged to empower. The Holy Spirit empowers us, right? And so I think that we gotta, as believers, can't allow every word to be co-opted and not redeemed.
I agree. I think, at this point, there's literally nothing you can say that isn't because of a different meaning that's just safe to say to everybody. You know what I mean? It's like, the letter A makes these three sounds. I don't know. The letter A makes one sound. It makes, I don't know. It's weird.
Because I would say it is weird in the fact that what has happened in terms of the weirdness of it is that we as believers can't do things or say things to lift up one another or to really encourage one another. So think about it like this way. In James chapter 1, right? In James chapter 1, it says, let those who are rich and privileged, and this is Dhati Lewis translation.
Yes.
Like, you need to think more lowly of yourselves.
Yes.
Let those who are marginalized, disenfranchised, you need to think more highly of yourself. Because here's the thing, we are all peers at the foot of the cross. And sometimes the message to a group that has been diminished needs to be empowered. And sometimes the message to those who've been empowered needs to be humbled, right? Not to demonize one another, but to let everyone know we are all peers at the foot of the cross. And I think that is a biblical precedent that we see in James that he talks about when he talks about the favor showing partiality. And so this is the reason why I am completely behind like empowerment around whether it's minorities, whether it's women, and a variety of different things, because it's not like what we're trying to do is we're trying to equal the playing field. I think once one becomes domineering over the other, that's when there's a problem.
Yeah, I think when you hear empowerment through the lens of competition, then there is this fear and there is this need to crush and hold somebody down and remind people of their place because of competition. But when you think of empowerment really calling people to rise up to do the thing they've been called to do or made to do, then empowerment takes on a different meaning.
Yeah. And so it does take on a different meaning. And I think so what ends up happening, because I already know people are going to talk about it, but all right, okay, that's but what about after the fall? Because after the fall, we have to address what I believe and what has been taught. I mean, there's a real thing that in the fall, it says a woman will desire after the man, right? And so,
yes.
No, so I want to know because I want your pushback, but because I do feel like, and they talk about the same verse, and you've heard this sermon before, right? It's the same. That word desire is the same thing that Genesis chapter 4, when it says sin is crouching at your door and its desire will be over you. And so this idea that same word desire means it's desire to control. So they talk about the punishment or the implications of is that men are going to be professional couch potatoes because you didn't lead. And then women are going to be desiring to take control because, and so that has been a sermon that has been preached. And so people are responding to that.
I actually had the opportunity to hear someone teach that in a way that was a little different. And it was actually, I would love your perspective, but one of the things they said was that the scripture says that her desire will be for her husband, but he will rule over her.
Yes.
So instead of the opportunity to be in the partnership they were in before, because of the decisions that were made, you're no longer operating in this partnership. He will rule over you. It doesn't necessarily, this particular sermon was emphasizing that we're not necessarily seeing her at any point before or after try to take over her husband's role or be this, as a matter of fact, the reason why all of the women from after Eve on knew about the promised seed and all of those things is because of what the legacy she had left. So I wonder sometimes if it almost feels like that idea of creating this narrative of women wanting to be in control and take over, is almost implanted there when really the idea is that, no, he's going to lord over you. He's the one that's going to want to be in control. And actually, you got to sit back and you got to take it now. You're not a partner. You're no longer his side by side. You're now going to be the person that he's going to want to rule. And if you're a woman in a lot of spaces, that teaching makes a whole lot of sense because you're like, I'm not even doing anything. You just want to make sure you're in control. And so I don't know.
I've never heard that take, but I'm not against it. I'm not against that take because I think what it introduces regardless is that there's now a power dynamic that is introduced because of sin. And I think that is the key. And the question is how do we restore, right, what has been broken because of sin? And that power dynamic and those dynamics are, again, because the thing is like we live in a society where everybody wants to blame the other people. And here, like I will say, regardless, like it's on me, regardless of what type of relationship, to take on the mind of Christ versus taking on the mind of Adam, right? The first Adam said, it was the woman you gave me.
Yes.
It's the second Adam says, I'm willing to die.
Yes.
I lay down my life so that I can present one as spotless and without blemish. And so I do think, and I think that if we would take on the posture, right, of, how do we overcome power dynamics is the one of humility, right? Yes. Of one of vulnerability, that we are both in need, getting back to the need. And I think it goes back to what was God's intent pre-fall of that shared purpose, that shared that dignity, that equal dignity, shared purpose, mutual partnership. I think that is kind of the goal in which we're trying to partner. Then we won't get caught up in what I would consider our decade, our generational things. What do I mean by that? Generational dynamics, if you think about 30 years ago, 20 years ago, right? The thing was a woman can even make more money than a man without being unbiblical or ungodly, right?
Right.
You know, nowadays, no one's saying that, at least most people. I'm not going to say no one.
Listen, at this point, with this economy, whoever's making money in this
is
house,
like, please,
right? Yes.
bring it in. Go make the money. But you see what I'm saying? But 20, 30 years ago, it was like unbiblical. It was unbiblical. And so this is what we're talking about. We're bringing in cultural things and we're slapping it on, you know, to things and trying to make them biblical and throwing them into like verses like Genesis chapter 3, instead of coming with a sense of humility, right? And so I think that just what you said, like we are at a point where we recognize ain't nobody surviving. Very few people are surviving off of one income, right? So we're going to take a posture of humility.
You know, it's so funny. Prior to where we've been in the past 10, 15 years, I came from a space where I only saw men and women in partnership, right? Men were the pastors, men were deacons and all, but there was just this idea of the reason why this household is running, because we're running it. You know what I'm saying? And so you doing your part, I'm doing my part, I'm doing the dishes, you doing hair, whatever. And then I moved to a space where it was very much like, no, you're a woman, you do this, and he's a man and he does this. But that no longer felt like partnership. It felt like relegated. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you don't really have a choice. And so I think that that's what's made for me the idea of women in society, not even necessarily the church, but just in society. So feel almost confusing because I've seen it one way, experienced it one way. And then I also was raised by a single mom. So I've seen women just got to go do the things. But then to move into a space where it almost felt like the role of womanhood was a reaction, was equal relegation as opposed to this dignified, purposeful thing, makes it feel like gives you the ick.
Yeah. No, and I'm in agreement. And I think that comes back down to like that equal dignity, shared partnership, right? Like in this being able to understand where like that we're mutually partnering. So like for me, for instance, and I know we're not just solely talking about marriage relationships, but you know, and Angie and I, like I came into our marriage with $30,000 worth of debt. She came into our marriage with money in the bank, you know, and I was just like, I wonder who does better with managing money, right? And so like I've told people for years, I submit to Angie when it comes to managing our money. Now, in the same way, I do not relegate or abdicate my responsibility as leading the household. But I understand as one who is responsible in leading the household that it is smart for me to put the right people in the thing. And so it's not even about me giving her that. It's just about like, no, this is like, we're in this together.
Right.
Like,
it makes sense.
Let's partner. We're mutually partnering together for our common good so we can honor God and glorify the Lord together. And I think that is where this idea of mutual submission, and there's things that I submit to her and I'm not going to go and not do something that she was just like, we don't need to do this, but vice versa. There's things that she submit to me. And I think that is being able to be like really clear and talking through that. And guess what? We change from season to season.
Right.
There are certain seasons where like, hey, I'm going to do this. There's certain seasons where you're going to do this. Yes. But like this whole idea, again, going back 30 years ago, it was just like, as a man, you ain't supposed to wash the dishes. You ain't supposed like there was jobs that were relegated to women and jobs that were relegated to men. And I think that we are making that same mistake. It's not just dishes and those things now. There's other things now, but we're making that same mistake that we're doing in areas that I think God gives us freedom, right, to be able to apply in different ways.
And I think the ripple effect for that is what we're seeing in society, when we're seeing whole groups of people, women saying, you know what, if this is what you want womanhood to be, that's completely fine. I'm opting out. I will be a single person. I will stay single because being in this relationship requires something more then either I have the capacity to give or that I believe is the definition of. And so
let's talk about that. This whole idea of opting out, right? Because, I got some thoughts on, this idea. Again, because this whole idea of opting out, we just went through this in church, talking about the role of government and submitting to government. One of the things that I think that we need to do better as Christians is to understand that it's not just the application of these that are under attack, but it's the very institutions that God has established are under attack. Correct. Government, which Romans 13 says, was instituted by God.
Right.
Marriage, instituted by God. Like, these things were instituted by God, and they're being attacked.
Right.
However, we recognize that there's extreme pain that has come from these institutions.
Right. Because of these things. Genesis.
So my question to you
is,
as someone who is in a broken system, is someone who is but understands that these institutions, the church is another institution that is ordained by God. We are now we think we can live in a governmentless society without being married to anybody, and then having our relationship with God outside of the church. You see what I'm saying? And that's normal. That's called Wednesday now, right? In 2025. My responsibility to you as someone who recognizes and understands and is not putting our head in the sand, saying, look, there are harm that has been done by all these institutions. How do you stay in as a woman, right, in these institutions, understanding that these are God-ordained institutions? How do you wrestle with the pain and the harm that's been done with these God-ordained institutions without throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Well, part of it is because I recognize that with leadership comes responsibility. And I think all of us are leaders. So I don't think that that's special to me, right? I think we're all leaders. But because of that, there's a responsibility to not just sit and recognize my own hurt, but recognize that if I'm hurting, so is someone else. And so as I'm working through the process of my own healing, I need to be bringing someone else through that process too, so that they can be bringing somebody else with them, so that they can be bringing so that we can begin to walk not so much with the limp, but in the healing that comes from being a part of the kingdom of, So I think that there's this requirement in me to stay because I'm supposed to be a part of the solution, and to just lay down and die is not bringing people along for healing. So that's where I am. I also want to say though, as a Christian, if it was all terrible, why would I want to be it, right? I remember when my daughters were young, I remember thinking to myself, I need to be intentional to not make being the idea of being a wife and a mother, or just being a grown adult woman, seem hard, sad, depressing. You know what I mean? Like, I need to be intentional to let them see the joy of the Lord, to see the joy to love being a woman, to embrace the decisions I've made to be a mom, like all of those things. And I think part of that is a leader's mentality that says, I need you all to recognize the greatness in this as well. So I love being a Christian. I love being a Christian woman. I love being a Christian woman in the church, under a government, and all of those other things. Because I do know, even in the midst of this brokenness, that we see all of the glimpses of light that God is shining through, and we see, this is God's plan. Oh, I see what you're doing there, Lord. Oh, I see how you're redeeming things, and how you're using me, and how you're using them, and where the goodness comes from.
And I think that's the story of the scriptures, is the theological implications that we see from Genesis 1, 2, 3, as soon as sin enters the world, is the idea of his plan for restoration.
Yes.
And that's what I hear you saying, that you are engaging in being in the restorative act of what's taken place after the fall. Correct. That introduced this power struggle that we have now with one another.
Yes.
And we see throughout the scriptures that, like, the redemption of this power struggle, whether it be male, female, male, all of the things is like being able to be redeemed. And also seeing that through all the way to the point where even maybe applied, because we see some of the Levitical laws and some of the things that would not be okay in America today. You know what I'm saying? Would not be okay. In America, will not fly right now. However, right? But we see all the way to when Jesus comes that we are co-heirs, right? It's sort of like the full redemption that has been tarnished in this, like the brokenness that we've experienced all the way back in the Genesis 3, power struggle that was introduced to us that we will have. And I think that's critical. I think that's a critical piece to understand. So now we flesh it out. And I think through the presence and power of the Holy Spirit, we get to flesh it out. And God gives us liberty to understand me and Angie have a responsibility in our home. Me and I believe we have a responsibility in God's house, the church. We have responsibility to see those implications played out in government and society. That is what does it mean to be equal in dignity, to have mutual purpose and commonality, right? Partnership with a shared purpose. And I think that those things are just the consistent thing that we have to fight, understanding brokenness is going to come at us, right? It is all around us. And we bring the brokenness with us.
Yes. Often I hear conversations about how culture is almost like we should live in this fear of culture. And let me be clear. There's a lot going on. It's a mess out there. I would never just send my daughters to Google to find much of anything because it's scary. But I also think that we forget how broken our own hearts are and how there is our own propensity for sin. So rather than being a warrior against culture per se, I think we need to be more like warriors for the pushing people towards the kingdom so that they can be whole. You know what I mean? And so that I don't necessarily have to say, I hate this artist, or I don't listen to them, or I don't talk to them. What I can say, the Bible does say ... And he already spoke about this. This stuff is not new. This stuff is new to you. Culture is just reinventing the wheel. But in all reality, God has answers for these things. And I think that that's a much more healthy way to even think through my womanhood.
I love that.
In culture.
And can I say this? I'm going to talk more about it when we talk about some of the manhood and kind of how I embrace manhood. Is a thing called the 33 series that has helped inform me. And this is going back to Genesis, but I think it can be applied to all, and specifically in this conversation and what you just said. There's 4 things. It talks about reject passivity, accept responsibility, lead courageously, and invest eternally. And I think those are things, and they talk about what manhood is, but I think that this is just being humanity. So, I think the first 2 are something that what I want to hone on based upon what you just said is this idea of rejecting passivity and accepting responsibility. Because if we don't, what we will always continue to do is repeat the same mistakes that the first Adam did. The woman you gave me, right? And, and we won't look internally, right? Because we're always easy at blaming. It's my upbringing, it's this, it's that. It's everything else that's the problem. As if we fix everything else, things would be okay. No, the problem is us.
Yes.
Right? The problem is us and people like us that brings brokenness and sinful desires and intent and all of that to the thing. And I think if we would all take responsibility, that's the second part of that, reject passivity and accept responsibility, that through the person and the person and work of our Lord Jesus, surrendering to him through the presence and power of his Holy Spirit, that I think we can become the men and the women that God has called us to be, right? Based upon the fragmented and brokenness in our world.
Yes. So then it just made me think a thought, so then God's design for women is not this reaction, because I told you I was at this place where the definitions it seemed like it was a reaction to culture, but God's definition, God's design for women is a reflection of his character. And when we believe that about the men, the women, the boys, the girls in our community, then we are viewing them differently, and we are rejecting passivity and trying to shape them to reflect the character that God has designed in them, right? And
therefore empowering women. And empowering women. Because it is so important. And let me just say personally.
Yes.
As someone who is about multiplication, discipleship, church planting, wanting to see all of those things, what I realized, I went to a conference and I was convicted to the core, because at this conference, it was stated hey, most of you would have a plan if a male came to you and says, I feel called to the ministry. Mm-hmm. And like we would know exactly what to do, how to line them up, what's the do, go through this step 1, step 2. So he says, but what if a woman came to you and they said they felt called, right? Well, what's your plan? What's your strategy? And I was just like, I don't have a clear plan. I don't have a clear strategy. And so right there, I made it my aim. I said, Lord, I will never, ever want to not be ready to empower any person, male, woman, female, child, like to say when you are calling people and you have empowered, you have convicted people to want to live for you, that I am ready to empower them to become the man, the women, the child, the person that you have called them to be. And I think that is basically getting us back to this idea of
getting us back to Eden.
Getting us back to Eden. I love it. I love it. Getting us back to
Eden. My last job, one of the things that a couple jobs ago, one of the things I loved, I worked with college students and seminary students. Mm-hmm. And when the women would come in to get their theological training, at the beginning, there was a lot of reticence. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to become. I don't know what I'm going to use this degree for. And then even as they would go further along and hear some of the rhetoric of some people who just didn't seem to recognize God's call for all women, for God's call for all people, they would begin to get scared. Like, I'm spending this money on this degree and I don't know, how can God use me? But to then sit on the couch near graduation and hear the stories of how God had opened this door and God had opened that door and God had opened this door and God had opened that door, or they had this plan and that plan. It was just this reminder that God does call women to do ministry in all kinds of spaces and ways. And then I worked there long enough to begin to see people come and graduate and get reports about, can you believe God is using me to do this? Can you believe I get to go around the world and do this? Can you believe I get to tell people in places about him like this? And do you believe I get to lead teams like this? It's just a reminder that you're right. God has called women, and it's silly of us to not be prepared when we are the ones who say, the Bible says the harvest is plenty, the laborers are few. How dare we tell half the church, we don't got no plan for you, even though we need you.
Yes, that's spot on. And so we got to commit to discipling the whole church.
Yes.
And giving them spaces where they can lead. I'm talking about men, women, like we have to be able to do that. And so I'm convicted, have been convicted, and just wanting to make sure, as someone who is a complementarian, to understand, I'm unashamedly complementarian, but I think we have a lot more freedom than what people think, what that means to complement one another. It doesn't mean that certain roles or even certain duties are only reserved for one gender. It means that we legitimately complement one another, right? Because we were fearfully and wonderfully made.
And I don't think that there needs to be anything wrong with saying that there are things that are germane to women. Like, I think we as women have the opportunity in society to help with the creation of life, sustaining life, nurturing life. I think that is something beautiful and is a part of womanhood. And then there's the way that we're able to think through what it means to do that with multiple people. There are more humans in my home because of this thing that is uniquely woman. And I think that the moment we don't want to allow that to be okay, that there's this role that is woman, or that there's this thing called feminine, and that we can embrace it, then we actually do ourselves a disservice, because it's how we've been created. Now, what it looks like in each woman is different, but it exists. And I think that if we run from that, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. And then we're forgetting, like you said, God has instituted certain things for certain reasons. And I just believe that he was purposeful in making women women and men men. And I can't speak to God's ways, but what I can say is I don't think he made a mistake in making me woman. I think that the parts of that have been hard have been because of the brokenness around me,
Yeah. So what does that look like in the role of the church? Women's role in the church, because this is the biggest thing. What can women do? What can women not do? Answer all the questions for all the human beings in this subject matter right now for us all.
One of the questions I was going to ask you, and I think I heard someone ask somebody else this. This is why I was going to ask you this. If Jesus were walking on our streets today, how do you think he would engage women in leadership, women in business, or women in family life? And I think he would engage them all the same way. You know why? Because he created them all and he gave them all these particular callings, these particular gifts, these particular resources, these particular opportunities. And then he also gave them the free will. She's a mom because she chose to be a mom, and she runs a business because she can run a business. And I think when the church begins to recognize that Jesus would embrace these women, he would offer them himself, which all three of them would need. But then he would say, now, how do I make you fishers of men, right? How do I take you, woman, who is in this business sphere, and give you the opportunity to go do it for my kingdom and for my glory? And so I think in the church, much the same way, I don't think Jesus would show up in church and be like, oh man, y'all got all these women running around here doing all this stuff. They need to sit down. I think Jesus would be like, yes, go get the communion. Yes, go, or whatever. That was a random thing, but I'm saying, like, I don't believe that women are supposed to be this invisible network of childcare workers in the church. I just don't believe that that's what
100% agree.
Yes.
And I think God gives us so much freedom, so much grace, so much in order to manifest what that looks like. And I think when we start saying, so what that looks like in this situation, women can and can't do, I just think that there's I just don't see that biblically. That where in the scriptures does it tell a woman it can't do anything specifically, right? Now, here's the thing. This is kind of where I land on this. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it.
Okay.
Like, can a woman be a father? Can a woman be a husband? Can a woman, right? So I would say no, because those are things that are specifically given to men.
I agree.
Now, what can a husband do that a wife can't do? What can a father do that a mother can't do? That is a completely different question.
I agree.
Than asking whether or not they can be that. So I think there's a difference between what we do
and who we are. Yes.
And I think that we're coming at this thing the wrong way, in terms of trying to define who we are based upon what we do.
Now, we could just drop the mic right there because I think that's beautiful. I think when we recognize that God has created us male and female for a reason, he has a plan, and it may take a long time before we figure it out, but who we are is separate from what we do. Who we are image bearers, designed to bring God glory in all of these different ways, and it is okay. And I want to say, I do believe that there are things that God has specifically said yes or no to, right? Like you said, can a woman be a husband? Can a woman? But I also believe that it's okay that God has specifically said those things.
Oh, 100%. You know what I mean? And again, I want to be really clear. And I think that there's certain things when we're talking about God's household. So we're talking about in the area of the church, and in our households, in the area of our home, right? That we need to be clear, right, on what those things are, right? So I'm just wanting to be clarity, but I do feel like there's freedom.
Yes,
I think there's a lot more freedom that God gives without giving up our responsibilities.
Yes,
there are freedom. And I think that's what we have to embrace more. We have to be a lot more able to have genuine conversations about what that looks like.
People as individuals, and not just see them as men and women, but as humans, as people that God has created and gifted differently.
Yes.
Well, this is a conversation that could go on and on and on. We could talk a lot longer about this topic, specifically womanhood, womanhood. Maybe we should do this again. Not right now, but we should do it again. But what I do want to say is that for urban missionaries and for people who are wrestling through it, God has answered, right? And God did not create us as second-class citizens as women, but to reflect his glory and his character in society. So I'm here for it. I'm here for womanhood. Amen.